Good evening. Evening, Rosemary.
Hi, Gary. Hi, Gary.
Yeah, good. She's my prop. Tonight we've got some of the students from ARA, from the broadcasting school, so they're doing so. I haven't said this yet, but you've dropped the average age down to 82. Thanks very much.
After you leave the room, Gary.
Yeah, I know. There's no. Hang on, there's a seat here. But if you come and sit in the front, not you bloody Irish can stand. Hey, you know, this guy is so misguided. He encouraged the Irish Society to make them me their patron.
Very misguided.
Yeah, very misguided. Anyway, welcome everybody, and I'm sure this is a topic that's of great interest to us all. Yes. But before I start, Bruce sent me a email this afternoon pointing out that at about 4 o'clock there was an announcement that one of the insurance companies, and I'm going to... Allianz, very hard to remember, have pulled out of New Zealand with most of their insurance, and on the back of the Christchurch earthquake. So that ties in with Melissa's comments, and I must say, Gerard, you did a superb job of interviewing Melissa. That's all the praise you're getting. Well, I mean, I rang this guy the other day and said I'm on my own. I'd like to have somebody to have a cup of coffee with, and he declined. So why am I praising him? Anyway, so that sort of does show what Melissa was saying to us is coming home to roost. And there was an element of denial last week with the speakers that the insurance companies will come around. Well, they're not going to come around, and we're going to have to actually get our heads around that. So IAG are not taking any new policies in Wellington. And you think if you were just getting into your first house, mortgage to the hilt, and you need insurance to secure the house for the bank, you won't be able to get into the house. So we've got some big challenges as a society. But one of the tonight we've got Patrick O'Connor. Patrick has worked in the refugee and migrant community for 40 years, and he's been an incredible bridge between communities. And we've done, Patrick and I have done a lot together as tattered remnants of the old Catholic mafia. He's more tattered than I am. And it's, I think to start off with, I have to acknowledge the contribution that Patrick has made to relationships between cultures in the city for so long. It's been brilliant. So he's told me I have to stand on his foot, which is one of the vulnerable parts of his body, after 30 minutes. So you'll hear a scream, and that's the end.
Well, thanks, Gary. Is that on? Sorry.
Just if you stand close to it.
Here we are. Is that on?
Yep.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Tēnā mana. Roi rangatira nā. Nau mai haere mai nau mai. Mō tēnei hui hui nā. Ko Patrick O'Connor aho. And especially for Gary Slanche, Cade Mila Felcher, a dear Gutsik Slacken of Wharakokoro Hua. Does anybody know what that means?
He does. He's Irish.
It's called your herd, Gary.
Thank you for the welcome.
It means that you might as well bugger off because I've got nothing to say. Cultural diversity is the subject, and it's got a lot of relevance and topical relevance at the moment, particularly with things that have happened in Christchurch. and that's very important and very relevant. But it's been going on for many, many years, the subject of cultural diversity, forever probably, but certainly for the 30 or 40 years I've been involved, and many people in this room have been involved, Gary, and I can see others around who have been involved very much also in the topic and the area of cultural diversity. So just to acknowledge those, and also to acknowledge people in Christchurch who aren't here, and New Zealand really, because there are so many people who have been working in this space. And it's not new, it's very new a little bit at the moment with things that have happened. But it's not a new area, going back many, many years. And Leanne Dozell, our Mayor, was very much involved as Minister of Immigration when she was Minister, and has been very much involved as Mayor as well. And as Minister of Immigration, I had a lot to do with her in those days. And she was a fantastic Minister of Immigration, very consultative and always listened to refugees and migrants, and that was fantastic. So all the people, I can't thank everybody individually, but particularly Gary, you as Mayor for nearly 10 years, and before you were Mayor and since you've been Mayor, you've done a lot of work in this area too, and so thanks very much, and thanks for organising these talks as well. Particularly also in the room is Ahmed Tani here, who's chair of the New Zealand network of refugee organisations, and is a former refugee from Somalia and runs the local refugee council, and has been working here actively for over 20 years in the refugee space. And Claire Phillips particularly too, from the City Council. Claire's the principal advisor there for community, and has also got a new role looking and coordinating mosque responses to mosque activities, and has worked for, I think, probably 30 years as well in this space. So thanks very much, Claire and Ahmed Tani, for your contributions. So just a bit of an introduction. I spent some years travelling and working in various countries overseas, and learnt a lot about cultural diversity in Africa, and I worked and lived in Greece and France and taught there and did other jobs there, and in London worked with refugees as well there, and so I learnt a lot about it there. And then when I came back from overseas, I went to Wellington for a year to go to university to do a diploma in teaching English as a second language. And just a bit of a story there. We ran the African Centre, which it was called in those days. It was quite a prominent place throughout the country in those days, pre and post Springbok tour. But it was all to do with the continent of Africa, not just South African issues. We wrote to Sir Bob Jones once and said, "Dear Bob, could you please see your way to give us a few dollars? Whether it be, 50 cents or $5 million, we don't really mind, but anyway, yours sincerely." And he wrote back and said, "Dear Africa Centre, my only interest in the continent of Africa is in ravishing their women. If you can help me in that regard, I might consider donating $1 or $2. So we wrote back and said, "Dear Bob, our interest in Africa isn't helping men, women and children to enhance the quality of their lives. Our only interest in philanthropists like you is to ravish your bank accounts." So,
Did he reply?
he replied with a few expletives in the letter.
And no money.
And no money. No money. So that was just a little. I better put the glasses on, I think. Have I got them here? Yeah, so Bob Jones didn't start off well, but that was my reintroduction to New Zealand life. And then came down here to Christchurch, and it was the Springbok tour, of course. And then post Springbok tour, and this is where diversity comes into it. Post the Springbok tour, in Christchurch and New Zealand generally, was a really fertile period for looking at diversity and things like racism and multiculturalism and things like that. It was an amazing period, and many people in this room will have experienced that, I think, and taken part in it. It was a really fertile period. There were hooey on racism everywhere, going on all the time, and structural analysis run by a Catholic priest, Father John Curnow, and a fantastic time for analysing our society. And I think it's due for that kind of thing again now, in my opinion. At Pito, the Multicultural Learning Centre, I 30 years ago thought I think it would be good to set up a school for Pacific people and refugees and migrants teaching English as a second language. So I did that, and I retired just in December just gone. And we taught ESOL, and specifically ESL within ESOL, because some people don't understand, unless you work in that area, that ESL and EFL are quite different according to the cohort you're teaching. So if you're teaching refugee and migrant people who are going to live here, you teach ESL. So we did that at Pito for years, as opposed to private language schools who teach EFL, to English as a foreign language, to students who come from, say, Japan, for example, for 6 months and then go back, and they live and operate in their first language, Japanese in that case. Whereas the people coming here, like our mate Ahmed here, he's coming here to function in English. Although Ahmed was a teacher in his own right in Somalia, so he didn't need English so much, but people from his community did. And so we would teach them ESL. We also taught cultural orientation, and that was teaching health and education and the police and the law, democracy, government, Treaty of Waitangi, all translated into the first language of the group that we were teaching. So this week it'll be Koreans, next week it'll be Chinese, next week it'll be Somali, for example. So this was the first and only course in New Zealand, and it still is the only one operating. We also did employment advocacy and a lot of social services, and we were virtually a one-stop shop, together with other places like the Refugee Council and ARA and Hagley Community College, particularly English language partners. So providing services, a range of services for people. And we collaborated with all those organisations, particularly the City Council and Gary when he was Mayor, Claire when she was at CDC, and central government. So there was a lot of collaboration, and Christchurch has led the way in those areas for all those years. I've got here, if anybody hasn't got one, I've got a few more left here. This is a handout just today, and there's quite a bit of interesting information there. And we've got copies of the multicultural strategy, which Claire Phillips is also the person in charge of implementation of this. So Claire will answer a few questions and make a few comments later on too. So anybody can take one of these if you're ready. I'm not an expert. You know, are there experts in our field? I don't know. Occasionally people are interviewed who might be experts, but it's so subjective and dynamic, and people have different views all the time. So this is the way I see it, and people might disagree, and that's fine. Etymologically, culture and diversity is reasonably simple to understand, but actually, when you look at research, there's so many differences of opinion about what culture means. What does it mean compared to ethnicity, nationality, citizenship? So quite difficult to define, and diversity is also difficult to define. In the last 2 or 3 years, and Joan Mecce, some people might know Joan Mecce, who wrote the great book Talking Past Each Other in 1987, it was visionary, 87. She often says, and I quite agree, that words change their meaning, but diversity is an example because, well, not change the meaning, but sometimes get colonised. So you'll see an article in the press these days, and it'll attract my attention, and it'll say, employers promote diversity in the workplace. And when you read it, there's nothing about ethnic or cultural diversity because it's gender diversity, which is totally valid. Of course, we've got to have gender diversity, but the word in the last 2 or 3 years has become rather exclusive to gender, not to culture. So I think it should be specifically mentioned. Sorry.
You're getting confused, Patrick.
Getting confused. I just thought it might be a good idea to kick off by reading a definition of culture, because definitions are just definitions, but this is easily the best definition of culture I've ever seen, and I think it can just set the scene for some things we'll talk about. Culture is what holds a community together, giving a common framework of meaning. It includes how people communicate with each other, how we make decisions, how we structure our families, who we think is important. It expresses our values towards land and time, our attitudes towards work and play, good and evil, reward and punishment. Culture is preserved in language, symbols and customs, and it's celebrated in art, music, drama, literature, religion and social gatherings. It constitutes the collective memory of the people and the collective heritage which will be handed down to future generations. And that's from a group called the Waitangi Consultancy Group. I've been using that for 20 or 30 years, but I've never seen a better one, and very comprehensive. And I think if we look at it also, sorry, on page 4, I'll just read the UNESCO one article. These are in your handouts, but just again to not up with play. I haven't got PowerPoint, so I know how to spell it. But the UNESCO Article 3, there are several articles, but this is a good article, on cultural diversity. The Declaration delineates cultural diversity as a factor in development. Cultural diversity widens the range of options open to everyone. It's one of the roots of development, understood not simply in terms of economic growth, but also as a means to achieve a more satisfactory intellectual, emotional, moral and spiritual existence. So if we look at those two definitions, you know, are we a multicultural society? We're certainly not bicultural, we're not multicultural. And I wonder if we're even monocultural, because the complexity of those definitions of culture, I don't think I could talk definitively on my cultural background to the extent that those definitions would demand. It's very, very complicated. So how can I understand Amatani's culture or Sophia's or Elin's cultures, from Korea and China? So very, very difficult, and that's the challenge for us. I don't think we can call ourselves a multicultural society. Yes, technically and literally we are, and we're multilingual. 22% of Christchurch people speak another language. 22%. 1 in 5.
As a first language, or
As a second language. Speak another language in addition to English. And 20% of Christchurch people were not born here. So, were born overseas. So, we've got 168 ethnicities according to the last census of living in New Zealand. So, and when this new census gets sorted out, it'll be well over 170 ethnicities. So, can we really say, apropos that definition, that we live in a multicultural city? I don't think so. I think we're multi-ethnic on the journey to multiculturalism, and that is the challenge for us all, I think. There's also part of the strategy that we refer to, the multicultural strategy. This is what Leanne Dalzell says in the multicultural strategy. As a city, we want people from all backgrounds to be actually involved in every aspect of what we do. And that's the goal, and I think Claire would reinforce that as a person involved in that. That's the idea, that the City Council want everybody to be involved in everything, when that's possible. And in Māori it says, Aroha ki te whenua, te tuapapa o te manaki, ki atawhai ki te iwi. Love and respect to the land, which is the foundation of hospitality. Manakitanga, hospitality, is what we're talking about. Care for the people. So, the challenges are there for us to really look at, probably a fairly liberal audience of people here tonight, but how can we challenge ourselves? How do I challenge myself to really be actively doing something? And when we look at the mosque situation, we have reacted, I think, fantastically, as a city, as individuals, as people, as a government, as a council, but it is reactive, and that's lovely. That has to happen, and of course it's happened well. But my argument is really we have to be more proactive, I think, in exploring culture and exploring, in this case, Muslim culture. There was an open day at the mosque about 2 months before March the 15th. Virtually nobody was there. There were 3 non-Muslim people there during the day. So, that was an open day at the Unknown Mosque in Deans Avenue. So I'm sort of saying, well, what are we doing now about Buddhism, Hinduism, the Jewish faith and community, and other ethnic minorities? So I think our challenge is that we really do try and do some more proactive kind of work in this area. Really, really starting at schools and things. But having said that, we also need to, I remember when I'm trying to lose weight, I sort of say, okay, I've got to lose 10 kilos. And after I've lost 2 kilos, what do? Celebrate those 2? or cry at the 8 I haven't yet achieved? And I used to cry at the 8 I haven't achieved. And But then I decided, no, I'll celebrate those two, and that'll give me a bit more energy to do the next two, and so on. And I think I'll just read this list for you of things that Christchurch has done in the last 15, 20 years in the city. We're the first city, well this is 22 years, we're the first city to have a refugee and migrant forum. Still going, it's now called Inform, convened by Claire again, and supported by the Christchurch City Council when Gary was mayor, and still is. 22 years, we're the first and only city to have a refugee and migrant forum. First city in New Zealand to have a refugee and migrant centre. This is all 2 kilos. The council under Gary's leadership funded Dr. Hassan Haji Ibrahim, a colleague of Ahmed's, to do a 6-month research project into diversity in Christchurch. 20 years ago, came up with 34 recommendations, 4 of which the council took on. And we were the first. One of the recommendations was to have a multicultural advisor paid for, employed by the City Council, first in New Zealand. The only intercultural assembly in New Zealand, which came out of that research, in which Gary and Mark Solomon, the Kaiwhakahari of Ngātahu, very strongly supported. And it was a funding glitch that discontinued it, but right now there's energy to restart that. The first time to talk celebrations, and Gary went to the States where they'd done something like that over there, Seattle, and came back here, and it involved inviting people from other ethnicities into your home to share a meal. And in some of those people from many years ago, 12, 15 years ago, it's still happening. People are still meeting from different ethnicities. One evening with the Reverend Peter Beck, we turned the cathedral, all the chairs out of the cathedral, tables, food and drink, and a great celebration in the cathedral with all these different ethnicities. I think we had 67 different ethnic groups in there. So all these things have happened here. The first multicultural subcommittee for the council, and when subcommittees were discontinued, the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, I think, there. But that was a very good subcommittee. First multicultural strategy, this one I've held up. First and only one in New Zealand. Still. Only cultural orientation course I mentioned before. The first ESOL course for deaf people. And deaf people, deaf New Zealanders, this is. So for deaf people, English is their second language. Sign language, an official language here. Sign language has a different grammar and syntax from English. And so these Kiwi deaf people with a totally different culture and a different language, the government funded this course for about 4 years at Peter, and they discontinued, and this is what bizarre things that sometimes happen in these fields. They discontinued because the benchmark for continuing was that you got 60% of the people on the course into jobs, into employment. Now these people, some of them were profoundly deaf, one was blind and deaf, and we got 51%. The government said no, it's not 60%. To this day, there's still no deaf course in New Zealand. Deaf people, official sign language, official language. So these are the challenges that we have to look at. So that was good in its time, but it's not happening. Chamber of Commerce had a migrant advocate, Jude Ryan O'Day, working there, and all of these sorts of things. And Network Waitangi, organised by Catherine Peat, who's often here. Is Catherine here? No. and Project Waitangi run by Bob Considine, they've been doing amazing work in Christchurch and New Zealand in looking at bicultural space, but from a multicultural perspective as well. So many good things are happening. There's these days a presentation to Council recently to promote diversity was a thing called the Hagley Hub or the Hagley Multicultural Centre, and Hagley have gone to the City Council to propose or request some funding for a hub, and they've donated the land and some operational expenses, and they want the council and some other funders to come to the party for the rest of it. I'm a strong supporter of it. Not everybody agrees with that concept. I really strongly support it because I think if I was going to live in Yugoslavia tomorrow or anywhere, I'd love there to be a multicultural centre that I could go to and feel part of and ask questions and be directed here and there and things like that. But there's a rider for me that if you're going to have a multicultural hub, and this is the term ethnicity too, that we've all got ethnicity and we've all got culture, all of us. Ethnic has been misused a wee bit to mean migrant and refugee people. But we've all got ethnicity, and I think the Hagley Hub should celebrate everybody's ethnicity, not just newly arrived migrant and refugee people, but the tangata whenua, the tangata tiriti, Anglo-Celtic people, and Pasifika people. Pasifika people often get left out in these discussions. And just to stress that the way that that word ethnic has been misused over 20 years now, a woman rang me one time about 20 years ago now, and she said, "G'day Patrick, how are you?" But she said, "I'm having a multicultural festival we're organising coming up in a couple of months' time." "Oh yes, and I just wondered if you could give me some of those ethnics." And I said, what do you mean? She said, "You know those ethnics that you work with, you know, I think they're from Somalia and places like that, those, you know, those ethnics." And I said, "Oh look, I'm sorry, I won't be able to help you in that regard. We're arranging our own multicultural festival." But that was her. I don't think she was genuinely trying to have a multicultural festival, so I think her motivation was probably quite good. But she was just trapped into this understanding of what ethnic meant. Ethnics. And I said to her in the conversation, I said, "Well, do you mean Irish or Scottish or," you know, being a bit naughty. So that's, I think the word ethnic has, and also the word cold, C-A-L-D, is used. It's borrowed from Australia, and it means culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and a lot of people use that, but it's exclusive, you know, it's other, culturally and linguistically diverse. Many cultures and people are culturally and linguistically diverse, but at the moment that term only refers to refugees and migrants, and really only refugees, cold people. So I think we've got to be careful about our terminology. The term tolerance, there's a quote in that you could read later on from the great Kofi Annan, and not be it for me to want to change the words of his quote, but the first word in his quote you'll see when you read it is the word tolerance. And I've been saying for years, I think tolerance is not an appropriate word. It should be acceptance, I think, is a more appropriate word. Because if I tolerate Gary's behaviour, which I have to do regularly, it means I actually disapprove of it, and I'll sort of put up with it. I don't really like it. But tolerance is used a lot in our sector. And I think even the great Kofi Annan uses it, but I think it should be acceptance. We just, we don't, in the paper in the last couple of months, there's great tolerance shown for the Islamic community. But why don't we use the word accept? We accept the Islamic community.
How about love?
Love. Love. Be great.
It's a bit strong for a New Zealander.
But the things that have happened at the mosque, I think, have just been absolutely superb. It's just, there are so many organisations and individuals, and the mosque people themselves. Ahmed was very lucky to escape that day, as he'll tell people. The bullets arrived in his car 1 minute after he got out and ran away, right through the window where he was sitting. And so the dignity that has been shown by our Muslim friends in this city is just absolutely unbelievable. Led by the Imam, but also all the other lovely people, Farid Ahmed in the wheelchair, etc. Integration and assimilation, these words are often thrown around, and people say assimilation in a very well-meaning way, I think. Let's have assimilation, let's assimilate. But really, France is the only country in the Western world that has a policy of assimilation. And it's where people leave their own culture and just adapt and become the predominant culture. And remember in about, I think it might have been about 69 or 70, there was a band called Blue Mink, and they had that lovely song about melting pot. You know, what we need is a great big melting pot. My sister Anne, who's down there, and me went to see them sing it in the town hall in about 1974. But a great song, turn out coffee-coloured people by the score, and it sounded lovely in those days. But that's what assimilation is, and I think it should be discredited, and another word that should be consigned to the dustbin of the vocabulary, replaced by integration, where integration is the thing that we should be doing and celebrating. And the analogy I always use is a culinary one of soup versus fruit salad, and you can see where I'm going there. The soup, it might be mushroom soup, and it's got garlic and herbs and onions and God knows what in it. And it tastes nice and it's lovely. That's assimilation. But the fruit salad is integration. So you can have a spoon of it, if you like, and have 4 fruits. But you can also pick out that pineapple or that grape or that piece of melon or what you like, and it looks beautiful together. And I think that that's integration to me, that, we can see our Italian friend here. She looks differently, she speaks a different language, and that's to be celebrated. I don't want you to become like me. I want you to be you. None of us do.
Patrick, sorry, because you just mentioned me, I just wanted to say one thing about this assimilation.
Hang on.
No,
So everyone can hear you.
it's just a very short one. I've noticed after the terrorist attack that, they've been saying many times, we're all Kiwis. And I think it's a wonderful, thing to say. But I would much prefer to say we are all citizens of Aotearoa, New Zealand, because it's really hard. It's like you have to think of you going in another country and saying, okay, you're Indian today, because you're now Indian. So for us, it's really hard to say, even though I've been here 30 years, to say I'm a Kiwi. It's true, my children probably will be more Kiwi than myself. So I would rather, just because of what you were saying, being considered a citizen of New Zealand and just retain my own identity.
I agree.
Lovely. And I think integration works both ways, and this is something that I think our sector need to grapple with a little bit. We beat up on ourselves for not promoting integration or doing it well enough, but integration also requires initiative from our friends from other cultures to join clubs, to learn the language. At the moment, we're doing work with mosque people who haven't got any language. So there's a lot that the communities can do, and it's a feature of the sociology of people who shift places, I think. You know, we all know about London, where Earl's Court is. So where do Kiwis and Aussies go? They go to Earl's Court. They work in Kiwi pubs, they work for Kiwi builders, they play rugby for London, New Zealand, same in Bondi, and so on, and the expat communities around the world. So it's not exclusive to other people, it's a tempting thing to do, the expat communities. But I think we really need to focus on integration moving both ways, and that's something that we can challenge. So, just to finish up, challenges and solutions. We're ill-informed culturally, again, referring to that definition. We're just simply not, like I've known this man for 20 or 30 years, but do I know enough about your culture, Ahmed? Probably I can learn so much more, and I need to proactively explore that, and as a society we do. So education in schools, I think, should really happen. We should be doing much more education in schools. We're monolingual as a country. Look at Switzerland, anywhere in Europe. In Switzerland, 4 languages by the age of 12. The peak of language learning is the age of 10 in human beings. So kids can learn 3 or 4 languages, at least 2. Why not make it compulsory? I know that word is not popular. I'd tick compulsory tomorrow in any referendum about language learning. Racism and prejudice, we have to confront it wherever it happens. So if I see you being racist in the supermarket, I have to say, excuse me mate, that's not appropriate. And I think that has to happen everywhere, that we see that existing. We have to appoint people. Years ago we got a job for an Ethiopian person in a pita bread making factory down in Sydney. After about 2 weeks, the owner rang me up and he said, "Hey, have you got any more of those Ethiopians? They're bloody good." And I said, "Oh, you can't ask for an Ethiopian. If there's one that's suitable and they're ready to be employed, we can send them for an interview." Well, there ended up to be 10 Ethiopians working at that factory. So we've got to appoint people to all sorts of positions, starting in the government, city council, to these positions. We've got to be proactive, as I said before. We've got to know much more about our own culture and be proud of it. Really get to know the depth of our own culture. And we've got to support language learning among people who have come here, because there's a lot of men and women that those of us who work in the field will know very well. They go to doctors and they might go with their 8-year-old son or daughter to interpret for them on sensitive issues, health issues. Even the other gender might be there because they're the ones who can speak English. I mean, imagine the reverse, I always say. Imagine if Australia attacked us and we became refugees, we got into boats and we went to Samoa, arrived there. Can anybody here fill in the Samoan winds form? You know, how do we go to a Samoan doctor? How do we find a flat in Apia? What do we do? I mean, it's that hard. That's what these people are doing. And in some cases, they've never been to school and are illiterate in their first language, and they might be 40 with a dead husband or a dead wife or whatever. So this is what we've got to try and understand in our approach to the whole cultural diversity thing. Just before I ask Claire to say a couple of things, I'll just invite our mate Amatani up here. There's a beautiful poem that's in your books, in your handout, and it's a poem originally in Māori, but I've never been able to identify the poet's name. For 25 years I've been trying, can't find it. So I always say original version, poet unknown. Translated to English and translated to Somali, which Ahmed has done. If you wouldn't mind reading it in Somali, and then, does anybody read Māori here? I can read it if nobody does. I'll read it in Māori, and Gary, you might be able to read it in English. So, Ahmed, come and... So this is it's a beautiful poem called the Diversity Poem.
Good evening, all of you. This is really a beautiful, beautiful one in our culture and in our language as well. So, waxaan anigu hayo, iyo waxa aad adigu ku deeqdid, waxay buuxinayaan sambiisheena. Waxaynu ka soo degnay doonyihii dunida, waxaynu nahay tafiirtii afarta dabaylood. Ku soo dhawow Atarwa, waa meel u taagan dhammaanteen. It's a very beautiful when I'm reading into my language and into my culture.
And in Māori, naku tu rolo, nau tu roro, ka ki te kete. Tātou kua tau mai nā waka i te ao. Tātou nā uri, noho e whā, piki mai, kaki mai, ki Aotearoa, tonga mo tātou katoa. And in English, where is... Oh, here we are.
With what I have, with what you offer, our basket will be full. We who have landed from the canoes of the world, we descendants of the four winds, welcome to Aotearoa, a place for all to stand.
Just to finish, I just thought I'd tell a wee story of how I was the victim of reverse racism myself, which I gladly accepted, I must say. I was in London and I was looking for a job. I'd been over in Europe and I had no money. And I saw an Irish road gang working down in Kingston upon Thames. And I thought, I wouldn't mind a job down with those blokes, you know. So I walked down there and I said to this fellow, great big fellow, Coleman Connolly from Connemara, he had fists out to here. I said, would you have a start for a man? You know, in the Irish vernacular, I thought that might help me. Would you have a start for a man? He said, oh, you'd be going down there to the trench and talk to Festy Aloysius Canavan, he's the governor. So I went down to this trench and there was this man, this Irishman down there. He was the governor, so he wore a suit. Irish labourers, the bosses, wear suits. And he had a suit down this trench, replacing sewers. And I looked down at him and I said, are you Festy Aloysius Canavan? He said, I am. I said, would you have a start for a man? He said, name? And I said, Patrick O'Connor, he said you'll be starting on Monday, sure. So, I must admit, I didn't question his racist attitude. I got the job and enjoyed working with the Irishmen. But Claire, would you like to join us for a seat, please? I've introduced Claire a few times, and she's in charge of the implementation of this strategy, which is the only one in New Zealand. It's a fantastic strategy, and it requires, it invites, I should say, all of us in this room to be part of it in our own little way of whatever we can do. Have a read of it. We've got plenty of copies here. Have a read, and if there's something that you feel you can do, get hold of Claire or start a little initiative yourself or something like that. But if you'd like to ask Claire any question, perhaps I could kick off by just saying, Claire, could you tell us where the implementation strategy is at the moment?
Yep, sure. Patrick did say that I was in charge of the implementation of the multicultural strategy, which was a bit of no pressure there. I'm in fact not in charge of implementing it. In fact, you guys are. I think that the strategy's been a long time coming. The city's advocated for a strategy of this kind for about 20 years. And so when it was launched 2 years ago, it was really a culmination of a whole range of people that have come before us, people that are still with us, our friend, brother, Amatani, Patrick, and the work, Maria, people who have worked in this sector for a very long time. And so the strategy was launched, and it'd be fair to say, and many of you may have a spare copy, or Patrick's going to give it out, that the first 3 goals of the strategy are really primarily focused on ensuring that the City Council is accessible, equitable, and encouraging people to be able to use their services. And goal 4 is really where I think we throw this out and throw it back to the community and say, I'll read it, where is goal 4? That Otatahi Christchurch is a city of cultural vibrancy, diversity, inclusion and connection. And so what does that mean? What does it mean? Do we go beyond the events and festivals that we have that we love, that are really good, but are only an outward manifestation of culture, a celebration of culture that many people like to go to, and maybe the first gateway into getting to know one another. But I know I've had many conversations with Patrick and other people, and I think it was our friend Hassan Haji Ibrahim, a Somali man, that had said many people say that Kiwis are friendly, people are really friendly in this country, to a point. We are really friendly, but will we let people pass the front door? Do people really get to know who we are and who our families are, and celebrate our births and our deaths and our weddings, and really get into to know one another? And I'd like to say, I suppose, working in this space for 30 years, I'm deeply privileged to have been able to have that opportunity and to call many people from many parts of the world very, very good friends. And we've witnessed each other in pyjamas, crying on beds, and children misbehaving, being picked up for town, and this is just life, really. And we've had many people come through our home and pay respects to dead relatives, and that's what it's about. And so when a lot of people are saying we want to be part of the community, we want to get to know people, what does that mean? So yes, we can go to Culture Galore, which is a wonderful event that happens annually, where you can listen to music. But the challenge really, I suppose, is how do we go beyond that? How do we really reach out and get to know one another? And there've been a number of initiatives throughout the year. The Time to Talk one springs to mind, but right down into a local neighbourhood level. Who knows their neighbours? How do people participate in all the other activities that are happening in the city that aren't just ethnic or multicultural celebration? How welcome do people feel going to Botanic Delights or the Christmas in the Park? And how many people are feeling like, oh, that's for me too, it's not just for everybody else? So that's a challenge that council has. As I said, it's a real privilege to have the responsibility, I suppose, as as a person working for council that can influence the decisions that are made, and can work deep within the local communities in terms of ensuring that there is equity of access to participation and information and services. So I find it deeply challenging and deeply rewarding. So the other job that I've got at the moment, just for now, is supporting the community recovery and an interagency response to the mosque attacks that happened on the 15th of March. And that we do in partnership and in consultation with our Muslim communities who guide us every step of the way. So if you have questions about the strategy, I know many of you might not have had a chance to read it, but I would encourage you, and I think you write minutes, don't you? Yeah, that I could put my email address if you've got questions or any ideas or things that you would like some support with. Council does fund. That's one aspect, but some things are free too. So things that you can do for free and also things that you can do as a collective. We can help support that. So the implementation plan is, I feel like a bit of a bureaucrat really. I'm probably the only token pointy-headed bureaucrat in the room at the moment. And we often feel very proud about waving these glossy documents around. But there's heaps of them, and they're not worth the paper they're written on unless A, we have resource and we have the political will and the support from our decision makers, but also that the community can see themselves in it and take it to their hearts and actually take some responsibility for implementing what's in the strategy. It's not just a council responsibility. This is a city, it's a community, it's a countrywide, it's actually a global responsibility. And the multicultural strategy is for everybody, as Patrick said. We all have an ethnicity, we all come from somewhere, and we all have a culture. And this is about all of us working together, hopefully in harmony. It's not always harmonious, but hopefully we'll work towards that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Claire. So first question to an Aussie.
Aussie. I love the serendipitous stuff that has emerged in the last few months, and I was part of the peace train on Saturday with, was it Saturday or Sunday? Saturday, with 200 cyclists taking over the streets of Christchurch, all ages, all ethnicities, and it started at the mosque and went to all the, went to the Buddhist centre, the Jewish centre, ended up at the mosque, went to the Catholics, the Baptists, the Transitional Cathedral, and it was amazing because I never knew where most of these things were, and we were invited to go inside, had a short introduction. They prayed for us in their own tradition and sent us off. It was fantastic, and I think most of the people there had never been to anything like that, and it was organised by one of the young men from the mosque. Well done. Hopefully an annual event.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm sorry I didn't know it was happening. Right, questions, comments?
Thanks, Gary. You read those definitions of culture earlier on, and what I gathered from them was they all had a very positive slant to them, so everything was positive about them. Now, New Zealand, I think, or I hope, has a culture, or is aspiring to a culture of egalitarianism. Okay? So when I see culture, I see, the class system of the United Kingdom coming to New Zealand, and we are having to modify that in the pursuit of egalitarianism. So I'm just wondering, in your definitions and understanding of culture, those other hidden things that are not so positive, and how that ties up with our pursuit of egalitarianism.
Thank you. I don't think we should be afraid of not approving of some aspect of culture belonging to another culture. I think that part of maturity as a nation is to understand that there are some things that we may not actually like. For example, not everybody agrees with the fact that on many marae in New Zealand, women can't sit at the front and women can't talk on the marae. So it's quite okay to disagree with that. I think you know, there are many aspects of British culture or Irish culture or whatever our origins were that we don't necessarily agree with. And I think egalitarianism was a sort of a utopian sort of a, I don't know whether it actually ever existed or not, but in my experience with people that have come here, they love aspects of our culture and they aspire to change and to grow and develop their own culture along those pathways. But in other ways, they reject some of the things that we do. Like this, the culture of having a meeting here, and you've had the Governor-General, the former Governor-General here before, and you're the former Mayor, and you've had the current Mayor speaking here. Now, in some cultures, in fact, I spoke to somebody about this very thing, in some cultures, this is just not correct. You've got to have a proper, formal place. I remember one lady, I won't say where she's from, but years ago she rang me up and she said, when Gary was Mayor, she said, "Patrick, I've just seen Gary Moore get out of his old car in shorts and jandals and go shopping in the Palms Mall by himself. This should not happen. He's the mayor of the city." And so, of course, she doesn't approve of that at all. She wants you to be formal with bodyguards and dressed in a nice suit. And I agree with her about that beard. But, and the shorts. But no, so there are aspects of, I think, that we can, and I think we have to understand to celebrate differences. We don't all have to be the same. So there's something that happens totally differently, let's celebrate it. You know, unless it's offensive, but if it's just nice but completely different, let's celebrate it.
Thanks, Gary. You probably notice I'm not from about these parts either. But when I first came here, in the last couple of weeks I've realised that I had three major advantages when I came here 25 years ago. I'm white, speak English, I'm Christian. Okay? And for people, yeah, thanks Gary, for people that have been coming here before and since, if they didn't speak English, they weren't white and they weren't Christian, huge disadvantage. And that's just really foregrounded for me in the last few weeks. But just, Patrick, a bit of a challenge for you. You said about education in schools, and I work in schools every day. The average age of a teacher is 57. Yeah. That means that the average of when they did their training is 1983. They were not trained to be able to cope with the fact that if they've got 30 children, they've got 30 different ethnicities, diversity, all those sorts of things. And taking the word diversity as well, I challenge you where you said about gender, because I know organisations that are now not just looking at gender diversity and ethnicity, but even moving towards looking at people with disability and spectrum disorder. In fact, I went to the one of the subcommittees of the council about a year ago and proposed the idea that Christchurch would become the first New Zealand city to be autism friendly. Because the town, or one of the towns that my family come from, Newcastle in Northern Ireland, was Northern Ireland's first autism-friendly town. So just think about the idea of being autism-friendly in Christchurch. Nothing's been done, unfortunately. I threw the idea in there. Nothing's come out, but I guess the guys are really quite busy. And then finally, your bit about languages. I was lucky to learn a number of languages, and you mentioned this of being monolingual. I just posted about this on Facebook last night. amongst teachers, there's a move to say, yes, we really do want language learning being compulsory, and they want to tick that box, because it's not just about knowing other languages and culture, but there's actually huge research around people who speak multiple languages and their brain development, to the point where we now think that there are parts of the brain that don't develop until you start to learn other languages.
That's right.
So just a few things to think about.
And I think, thanks for those lovely points. And I think also that all the research says that if you're proficient in your first language, you acquire a second language much more easily. So there are lots of children, sons and daughters of refugee and migrant communities, who are learning English, who are forgetting their first language, and they're finding it very difficult. But if we maintain first language in schools, I think is a very good idea too. So thanks for your comments.
Right, I think that's a good positive note to finish on. I remember when our kids were little, and Pam and I decided that we would ensure that our kids knew some of their whakapapas so that they could respect others. So we joined them up in the Irish Society, and they did the dancing and the oratory and all the things that you do and drinking.
Is that a racist remark?
No, there's no denying it. There's no denying. Anyway, but I've found it interesting watching the kids as they've grown up, that they've had a huge respect for all sorts of different cultures because they knew where they came from. It's only part of their whakapapa, but it is really important. And I've found it fascinating to watch our oldest daughter, Anna, and Greg, her husband, send their kids to Christchurch East School. And if you want to actually see cultural diversity, it's all there. You know, our other grandson is there as well. And he won a prize at the end of last year. And he's one of the 2 kids in the whole school that didn't have a brown face in the awards. And that's just magical, you know, and all those different, and there's an amazing array of cultures, and our grandchildren can't tell the difference when they say there's a kid coming to see them. Like there was a kid at my grandson's birthday party last weekend, and they were 2 Indian boys, and the oldest boy is saying to his little brother, there could be beef in that, you shouldn't have it. And his little brother saying, Dad doesn't know about it. So he'll grow up to be a Hindu eventually. But look, it is, I think when I look around this room and I think of all the people that were over the years that we've all worked hard on this, and just to finish off, I'll talk about that It's Time to Talk. I saw it in Seattle, and it was some magical program where you have a speaker, and as you walk into the room, you're given a number, and that number is that table that you're sitting at, and you sit at the table, probably don't know anybody else at that table, and then there's a provocative speaker in Seattle. They have all sorts of exciting people, but they then give a prompt for the people to talk about, and it's a topic, and then people talk for a while, and then they say stop, and now it's time to talk. We want you at this table to arrange a meal at one of your houses, and you're all to take your own food. And it's the most amazing mixture of people, and there've been tens of thousands of people in Seattle attend them over the years. And there are people who are still meeting for meals years and years after they first started. And that's such a wonderful way to get to know each other. And maybe that's something we need to promote again. But look, you can tell from the way Patrick and Claire spoke, they're amazing, way beyond a commitment to people who need people to walk alongside them. And they have done a superb job, and I'd just like you to thank them. next week our speaker is Duncan Webb, and he's coming to speak on the hate speech legislation. So, thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Gary.